Good evening, Yvonne. It means, in fact, these results mean that it puts Emmanuel Macron's majority in huge doubt, because as you mentioned, it's really likely that Emmanuel Macron won't have the necessary majority of 289 MPs at the French Assembly, because we have 577, so we need a majority of 289 MPs. And according to the projection between the result of the first round and the second round that will be held next weekend, Emmanuel Macron won't first get as many MPs as he had 5 years ago, but more important, he will need to do alliances and coalitions with other parties to be able to form a coalition and so a majority.
Why is the far left looking more successful in the parliamentary vote than they were in the presidential elections?
That's a very good question. And in fact, I may use the word look like, because first, the voting system is very different between the presidential election and the legislative election. And let's also remind that the motto, the slogan of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader of the far left party, was "Elect me Prime Minister," because we have good results, so you have to elect me. And if you have a look at the percentages of voters, effectively, he has the same score as Emmanuel Macron's party, around 1/4 of the voters, 25.6%. But if you do the projection in terms of seats, in fact, the party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon is really, really far from the necessary majority. So it means that Emmanuel Macron won't appoint him a prime minister, and he won't appoint someone from the far left party prime minister. It means only that for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, his party, the coalition of the left, the extreme left party, the historical socialist party, and the ecologists, will be the main opponent to Emmanuel Macron's policy during 5 years. And that's, in fact, the main victory of Jean-Luc Mélenchon and his alliance, NUPES.
What has voter turnout been like, and what issues have dominated campaigning so far?
So we had seen a historical record of abstention, unfortunately, during this election. Almost 52%, which is the highest one that has ever existed for a legislative election. And I would say it's very difficult because Emmanuel Macron and its party, Ensemble, which means together, enter into the political campaign very, very, very late. So it means that during a long period of time, other political parties campaigned, but no one knew what was the campaign of the majority. So that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously a lot of events happen on the international scene during this last couple of years with the COVID, with the war in Ukraine. And it was very difficult because even if it was at under the spotlight of the news, obviously that's a legislative election. So it means that French people are really concerned by domestic issues, wages, age of retirement, and so and so. So it was very difficult, and we had what we have called in the French newspaper, a very strange and late campaign.
To what extent has Mr. Macron's attempts to play mediator between Russia and Ukraine backfired?
That's a very good question. In fact, Emmanuel Macron has a positive, I would say, wallet or a positive asset in terms of international politics at the European level. First, let's remind that France is still at the head of the turning EU presidency for another month. And even on the international scene, Emmanuel Macron had a lot of successes. But once again, for the French people, it does not really matter. About Ukraine, it's very important because Emmanuel Macron was criticized to not entering into the debate at the beginning, and it was very, very late to give a clear position about what France has to do among a coalition in Ukraine. And also, let's also remind that something happened last week that really was a shock for the French population. The first French journalist was killed in Ukraine last week, and that was really a shock among the French population. So probably Emmanuel Macron took his time before saying what he wants for Ukraine and for France, but for French population, the trigger, the change was last week with the death of the first French journalist.
And you mentioned campaigning has come very late. How will strategies be tweaked ahead of the second round of voting on Sunday for all the major parties?
So, in fact, Emmanuel Macron has appointed a government after the presidential election. We have a new prime minister, Elisabeth Borne, and a new government. And Emmanuel Macron sent, because he really did it proactively, 15 ministers to the legislative election. Because we have to remind that by opposition to Australia, to be minister in France, you do not have to be elected. You can only be appointed. The best example is Dominique de Villepin, the former prime minister of France, who said no to the war in Iraq, has never been elected. So Emmanuel Macron appointed a new government, and he sent 15 ministers to the legislative election. And he said, if you can't be elected at the legislative election, you have to resign for the government. So it means that it gives to Emmanuel Macron a margin to maneuver in case of these ministers will lose, because Emmanuel Macron will say, you have lost, I have to change the government, I have to change my policy, and I will appoint new minister. That's the first thing. The second thing is obviously Emmanuel Macron wants to put the extreme left at the same scale or on the same scene as the extreme right. And his main speech is saying, if you don't want to vote for the extreme right, you also do not want to vote for the extreme left. And the extreme left is as dangerous as the extreme right used to be and is still in France. So really, he is doing what we call a Republican front, un front républicain, to say you don't want extremists, so you have to vote. The only solution for you, French people, is to vote for Ensemble, for the presidential party. And the last thing that Emmanuel Macron is playing with is saying that if you want to have a lower chamber that is able to help the country to go and to move forward, you have to have the same political color than the presidential president. So it means that if you do not give me a majority at the French National Assembly, it will be very difficult to govern the country. And this is not really what French people need at the moment. So we have one more week before the second term. But, it's very, very uncertain and very hard to say if how will be the next majority at the French National Assembly.
We'll watch with interest. Nathanael Bloch, thank you so much. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne.